Tim Burton's Batman was released in the summer of '89.
Yeah.
And I can remember what a phenomenon that was.
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. It had Michael Keaton, who people thought, maybe this guy isn't right, and it had Jack Nicholson.
Yeah.
And he got more money for that movie than anybody had gotten for a movie up until that
he
point.
negotiated a crazy contract.
Yeah. I heard, actually, that they wanted Jack Nicholson for that role, and he wasn't interested. And so they went to Robin Williams to use him as bait.
Oh.
And once Robin Williams said, sure, I'll do it, they went back to Jack and they said, hey, Robin Williams actually wants to do it.
That's mean.
Well, that's me.
No, seriously, and that's why Robin Williams turned down the role of the Riddler in the third Batman movie. He's like, screw you guys. Like, you basically used me.
You're
so
just
I'm not
going to get
doing
somebody
that.
else after I agree to this.
Yeah. But yeah, it was massively influential. I mean, it has this great Art Deco look. I mean, just the visuals in that movie are fantastic, and the performances are really great too. The one thing I didn't like is I didn't like the Joker origin story. Like
So they change it so that Joker kills Bruce Wayne's parents.
Yeah, well, you never really know where the Joker comes from. That's one of the things I really liked about the Heath Ledger version of the character. Is just, you know, like he just shows up and you have no answers for who he is, and
you don't need them.
Keeps it
You don't
mysterious.
need
Like,
them,
it's
right?
better,
But they
yeah.
try to force that into this Tim Burton movie, and it makes it a little hokey.
Yeah, and it's funny because now, like, if anything gets changed in the comics, people freak out. But like
Right.
the Burton Batman films are actually like he takes some like pretty big liberties, and I think as self-contained movies they work, but as like if you really compared them to the comics, they went in all kinds of weird directions.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this for me, like obviously I saw it years later, but for me it was like kind of an important part of what made me like movies. Like it was one of those like because my dad would watch like really classic movies. Like I watched growing up, I watched a lot of like very old movies, and this was one of the first movies I remember watching on tape and being like, oh, this is cool. Like movies can be cool and interesting and dark. And I don't know. The lighting in it was also really good.
I'm being told we should spend some time talking about the lighting.
Yeah. No, but seriously,
But just the visual style of it too,
No,
right?
it's
How
incredible.
colorful it was, like you know, the contrast between the dark and the light, but then the big like greens and purples of the Joker.
Well, if you remember though, actually the movie is a very dark movie. I mean, just literally the screen is dark a lot. They actually had to lighten it up for re-releases because people complained about it so much. But you have to remember when you're sitting there in the late '80s and you're hearing that a Batman movie is coming out, your last memory of that character, unless you're a diehard comic book fan, is Adam West.
Yep.
Right? Like the really campy TV show that they did.
really colorful.
And you saw Superman came out, you know, in the late '70s, and like there was some hope there. But like this was we take for granted now that you can go to the movie theater and see all kinds of amazing superhero movies.
And see a new
That
superhero
was
movie
not-
every 2 weeks.
That was not the case in the '80s.
No,
That was
yeah,
totally not the
absolutely.
case. So this is a big thing.
I guess they made 4 Superman movies. I don't know when 4 came out. Probably mid '80s, somewhere around there. So
My guess is that we didn't cover that in a series called
I don't
History of
think so.
Awesome.
I don't think so. My point is just I think it's been several years since we'd gotten a big superhero movie at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also, I think, responsible for what kind of Batman has become today, which is that he's the dark superhero. Like, it is dark, it is grounded, and it is like, the Christopher Nolan trilogy would never have happened without this. Like, you would never have been able to get
Michael Keaton's the guy who said, hey, maybe Batman and Bruce Wayne should have different voices.
Yeah.
You know, and that immediately rolled into Batman the Animated Series with Kevin Conroy and his approach to the character, and obviously Christopher Nolan in the way that Christian Bale approached it.
Christian Bale took it 80 steps further.
He went a little too far, maybe, but I mean,
rally.
but that idea that like there are different ways of expressing yourself as either character is something that Michael Keaton, I think, pioneered.
And because when you become Batman, you become Batman. Like, it's not just like a dude wearing the cowl. Like, it is like he is like a force to be reckoned with.
Maybe it's Bruce Wayne that he becomes, though.
Wasn't it
Maybe,
also-
maybe Bruce Wayne is the real mask.
Was that the story? He actually couldn't move his head in the cowl in the original.
There are all
Batman
kinds of
version?
things. Like he couldn't hear through it. The ears were too large for him to sit in the Batmobile.
So it was like really hot.
He was claustrophobic, but like he used a lot of that in the performance, just like that uncomfortableness to like get into character as somebody who's really not scared exactly, but really threatened and kind of in this weird place.
I appreciate
And
that.
that little actor grew up to be Birdman.
Right.
I appreciate that it wasn't an origin story.
Yeah.
They didn't spend any
Yeah.
time
They got right into
setting
it.
up the character. It's just in the beginning of the movie, he's Batman.
Because it's not like you need that,
Yeah.
right? You tell your grandma Batman, she's like, oh, right, I get it.
Got it.
Like she already knows.
Got a pretty hip grandma.
I would say one of the things that I think is probably most memorable for me from that movie, though, is the Danny Elfman score.
Yeah.
Like, Danny Elfman's score from that movie, like I identify that with Batman, and he had worked with Tim Burton on Pee-wee before.
Yeah.
He was big adventure with him
Probably
before.
Beetlejuice as well.
I think they've collaborated in almost everything.
Yeah,
so,
well, I mean, Danny Elfman is, I think, scored all but a few of
Yeah,
Tim Burton's
exactly.
movies.
Yep.
But yeah, that score, those themes, they used them in the Batman animated series. They still use them today in the Batman Lego games. Like they'll still pull out pieces of that score, and it's just, to me, it's instantly recognizable.
Yeah, super iconic.
Apparently, Tim Burton, though, is not super proud of Batman. There's a quote from an interview years later where he says, "I liked parts of it, but the whole movie is mainly boring to me. It's okay, but was more of a cultural phenomenon than a great movie."
I mean, think about what Tim Burton thinks of as normal, and so what it must take for him to think something is like cool or interesting.
But I also think, I mean, looking back on it, it's not a great movie, but it is a fun movie. You know, in terms of like, you know, just as when you compare like the great classics of movies, it's not a great movie. I mean, but it's a very fun movie, very stylistic movie. I mean, it's Tim Burton, so everything he does is very stylistic.
Yeah. It's got Kim Basinger. It's got Jack Palance is in it as like a crime boss. Billy D. Williams plays Harvey Dent. Like the movie is insane.
It's packed, yeah.
I also actually like Batman Returns. I know sometimes people give that one a hard time.
What's a little
A lot of
campier,
times
like,
people give that a hard time.
You know, I agree though. I like Batman Returns as well. I think I was like older by that point. Like, I'm still not like I was pretty young. But like
It did come out later. That's how that works.
The sequel came out after the first one.
It's interesting, thinking about the original Batman movie, I can't think of a lot of superhero movies that only have one villain in it anymore.
Yeah,
you know?
true, yeah.
Like you move on to Batman Forever.
Well, because
it's
now
like,
you're setting up the 11 sequels. Like that's the thing. Like now it's like more forward thinking. Whereas back then it was potentially a self-contained thing.
But even like the first Christopher Nolan Batman movie, it's like there are a couple of villains in that movie right away, and it's like I like the simplicity of like, look, this is just Batman and the Joker.
Yeah.
Yep.
One of my main memories of Batman, it was my second or third time seeing it in theaters. And there's the moment when he rescues Vicky Vale and he's going to grapple away and he grabs her and he asks her how much she weighs before they goes.
Right.
And she says something that's apparently low, like 110, 112. And this woman in the theater stands up and goes, "Bitch!" And I was like 11.
You're like, Mom, come on, I'm trying to watch the movie.